Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Ah, Juliet, Juliet, wherefore art thou, Juliet?
Wait a minute. Wrong game. Hey, you know how I was really glum about Ninja Gaiden 4 in my last video? Like that whole bit about wishing that Platinum could make a game they could call their own that wasn't beholden to an outside party? Turns out Grasshopper's living the dream I've always wanted for my boys. Net ease money notwithstanding. My original concept for this video was to microdose every Grasshopper game I could get my hands on and compare them against Romeo. But I had to find out the hard way that neither I nor my external hard drive was built for that. So instead, I narrowed my scope. I kept referring to Romeo as Suda51's 7th gen runback whenever I looked at its trailers, so I figured that's where we should keep our focus on. Shadows of the Damned, Lollipop Chainsaw, and Killer is Dead are what I call the Sonic Has Seen Better Days era of Grasshopper. They became a household name with Killer 7 and No More Heroes, but you never put those games in the same league as these games. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's first lay out what we got with Romeo. Romeo Is A Deadman is a 2026 action game developed and published by Grasshopper Manufacture. Net ease money notwithstanding. You play as Romeo Stargazer, a deputy sheriff living in the quiet town of Deptford, Pennsylvania. One night, he finds a woman lying on the road in the middle of nowhere and rescues her. After spending some time with her at his family's diner, Romeo plans on running out of Deptford with Juliet. Unfortunately, something gets in the way of their plans. That something being an attack from a pale zombie. In his final moments, Romeo is given a second shot at life by his grandfather, genius inventor Benjamin Stargazer. The dead gear system turns Romeo into a half-dead man, but because it doesn't really roll off the tongue, he's now simply referred to as Deadman. Hadn't mentioned this yet, but the world experienced some kind of space-time anomaly that's removed it from its position in space, and the FBI recruited Romeo to apprehend space-time criminals and suspects. Chief among them is a mysterious woman known as Juliet Dendrobium. Romeo must now travel through various versions of Deptford's past and future to confront Juliet again and again, in the hopes of finding the one true Juliet he first met that fateful night. Besides fighting Juliet variants, Romeo also goes toe-to-toe with a cohort of psychopaths who've gone into hiding in different eras of Deptford.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, which one of thou art Romeo? Juliet, Juliet, I am not overly sure.
Romeo's combat is an amalgamation of every gameplay mechanic Grasshopper dabbled with since the first No More Heroes. Your face buttons comprise of light and heavy attack, dodge, and jump. If you played No More Heroes 3 or Travis Strikes Again, you'll be familiar with the control scheme. You can hip-fire your guns by pressing R2 and ADS by holding down L2. Pressing either attack button while aiming will reload the gun. You don't have to worry about scrounging for ammo in this game, as Grasshopper figured out that reload time was enough of a check on weapon balance for the 4 guns you can equip, something I greatly appreciate after coming from Shadows of the Damned and Killer is Dead. Do note, however, that getting interrupted while in the middle of a reload animation prevents you from refilling your ammo. Some enemy types have flower buds that serve as weak points you can focus fire to insta-kill or at least deal heavy damage, kind of like the Heaven Smiles in Killer 7. Besides killing zombies, you can cultivate your own to use in combat. Enemies will drop bastard seeds of varying quality that your sister Luna can appraise to assign their roles. You plant these seeds in the greenhouse area of your home base and harvest them when they mature. Bastards are essentially Romeo's answer to the Dead Drive skills from No More Heroes 3 and Travis Strikes Again, but with more variety and depth. Bastards will either deal direct damage or provide support with area of effect abilities that can either buff you or hurt enemies. You can improve your bastard stats by combining and cultivating their seeds. The stronger bastard consumes a weaker bastard, and you have to replant and reharvest the victor. The zombie minion concept reminds me of those headless zombies in Lollipop Chainsaw that Juliet Starling could use by plopping Nick's severed head onto their neck stumps, or the Nick tickets that let you spin a roulette wheel to use Nick's head as a support weapon. Out of all of Grasshopper's pro tags, Romeo has to be the most kitted out in terms of weaponry, with 4 melee and 4 ranged weapons in his arsenal. Hold left on the D-pad and press the face button to swap out guns, and hold right on the D-pad to swap out melee. Don't expect Romeo to move like Yakumo or Ryu. you can't seamlessly swap out weapons mid-combo, without the help of certain bastard abilities. Your melee options run the gamut from All-Rounder, to the Berserk reference, Fuck Hands McMight, and the Ted Turner.
They go both ways.
He said they go both ways.
Like a bisexual.
Thank you, Ted. That was the joke.
What I like about the combat is that there's no objectively right or wrong choice for your weapon preferences. If you want to main a single weapon, then you can just stick with that. Killer Is Dead had enemies with armor that you couldn't damage unless you used a drill sub-weapon first to break their defenses, which limited your options in a fight. With the exception of one enemy type, Romeo's combat never feels like you need the right key to open the right lock for every encounter. Now, I've joked about Platinum's combat boiling down to meters, and that applies to some of Grasshopper's action games. Obviously, Travis has to charge the battery on his beam katana if it ever runs out, and some games like Killer 7 and Killer Is Dead use the blood collected from fallen enemies as resources for the Smiths and Mondo to either improve themselves or activate special abilities in combat. Romeo iterates on the blood meter with the inclusion of Bloody Summer. As you damage enemies, any blood spilled in your presence gets collected and fills up the meter. When it's full, you can press R1 to perform a stronger version of whatever your currently active weapon would dish out. If you've played Lollipop Chainsaw, the sparkly background should feel like seeing an old friend, but now they've really gotten into Gundam, and keep spamming that new type sound effect on Discord. Bloody Summer not only deals extra damage to enemies, but it also heals Romeo, so the game rewards you for playing aggressively and cashing in. It's a great back and forth, but I wish the guns had more creative attacks besides, the bullets are bigger now. I think about the alt fires that Johnson had in Shadows of the Damned, and wish that the machine gun got the auto-target function, or the pistol got the remote bombs. Oh, and if you kill an enemy with guns, you won't get the blood to use for Bloody Summer, as you have to be within proximity to collect it. Besides that, you can also heal from damage by pressing up on the D-pad, but the animation makes Romeo stand in place for a second, which can leave you exposed to enemy attacks, and you have a limited stock of heals as opposed to Bloody Summer's potentially infinite amount, so long as you have enough blood. If you play a Grasshopper hero, you're gonna have food preferences. Juliet with her lollipops, Garcia and his different types of liquor, and Travis with his sushi and ramen. Romeo likes katsu curry, and you can collect various ingredients while out in the field and bring them to his mom to cook some up. You play a mini game where you have to pull the katsu meat out of the oil at the right temperature to get the best grade possible, and that affects the efficacy and duration of the effects that the dish provides. Romeo can also drink some shakes for instant use effects like quick heals or Bloody Summer charges. You can pause the game and use items in the menu, or map them onto your quick use buttons that you can access by holding down L1 and pressing one of the D-pad directions. It's also how you can call up whichever bastards you've assigned by pressing the corresponding face buttons.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, then let us call thy numbers. Juliet, Juliet, then I shall take thy life.
If I had to compare Romeo's combat with Grasshopper's other titles, I'd say it's the most well-rounded, but ends up feeling sparse in a few key areas. In typical Grasshopper fashion, light attacks have quick recoveries, but enemies can tank through them, whereas heavy attacks can cause stagger, but have longer windups. They also have jumping variants, but I don't use them enough to make a call on their utility. Dodging has some iframes, but there's not much else to it besides unlocking a follow-up roll, and the ability to air dodge at the expense of using up blood. Romeo can equip up to 3 badges that he finds on the field for passive buffs and debuffs, and I always keep on the one that causes damage if you dodge into enemies. My biggest criticism about Romeo's combat is that, besides Bloody Summer and the Bastards, there's not much else you can do to interact with enemies. You can't clash swords with them, you can't suplex them, you can't land death blows, you can't dark step, you can't roulette, you can't double trigger, and you can't do any fancy gun maneuvers like in Killer 7, or borrow RE4 finishers like Shadows of the Damned. And while the Bastards are a more mature version of Travis's death skills from No More Heroes 3 and TSA, they're not a guaranteed effect as enemies can still hit the Bastards and destroy them before they can proc. It's my least favorite of Grasshopper's catalog, but I wish Romeo had some of Mondo's kit from Killer Is Dead. He's got the slickest version of Dark Step, and once I got how it worked, I liked how dodging and parrying worked in tandem on the same input. Hell, I love the insta-kill Mondo could pull off if you dodge a gunshot and press light attack. Lollipop Chainsaw has its issues, but even Juliet could split zombies in half after vaulting over them or jumping over crawlers, and she even has her own double trigger. I think Grasshopper wants to distinguish Travis from their other heroes with his wrestling moves, but Romeo also performs wrestling finishers after defeating bosses, so I think there's room in their stable for another luchador. I said before that Romeo can't swap out weapons mid-combo, and I think the game doesn't really capitalize on his arsenal because of that. There's no incentive to swap out to anything besides a katana, other than just to mix up the combat, or because you prefer the damage output of another weapon. Thankfully, enemies don't have strengths and weaknesses to weapon types, because that would put constraints in the combat in a way that discourages experimentation. If you've ever played Killer is Dead, then you know firsthand how it sucks to fight armored enemies when you don't have enough blood to power your drill sub-weapon. Same goes with the more gimmicky enemy types in Killer 7 that require you to use a specific character's ability to kill them. I will say though, that I like how Romeo makes the weapons available to you from the start, so long as you have the money to unlock them, and they're not so prohibitively expensive that you won't be able to get everything until the very end of the campaign. Like other Grasshopper titles, Romeo is plagued with input buffering, but you can cancel out of most recovery animations by dodging. The combo pool is pretty shallow, but you can stitch together strings with your dodge. Also, I like the transition between melee and ADS in Romeo because it feels a lot smoother here than in Killer is Dead or Lollipop Chainsaw. Where those games hard cut into aiming mode, Romeo's camera starts from a third-person action game perspective and then pushes into a waist-up angle when you ADS. The enemy roster is pretty healthy. You've got the standard rotters, you know, rotters because we can't call them zombies, and they'll either rush at you unarmed or take aim with their guns. At least they're nice enough to warn you before they shoot by revealing their sightlines. It's a carryover from Lollipop Chainsaw and No More Heroes 3. They're the Swarm class, weak individually, but overwhelming in numbers. There's the big heads who remind me of the aliens from Bloodborne. They're the ones who can tank through light attacks and dish out their own combos, as well as a charge attack that gives them a considerable range. They have a single weak point that's easy to reach if you're good with the pistol. Then there are the crawlers that scurry along the arena and leave hurt floors in their wake, and spew volleys of projectiles at a distance. They serve as area denial and support the melee units. The dancers also spit up range attacks, but their real purpose is to buff the other units so they become stronger and more aggressive. Their weak points are harder to hit than the first two if you don't have any bastards that can slow them down. The fatties attack exactly how you think they would. Slow, powerful hits, and a body slam that sends out shockwaves. I don't like this attack because the hitbox is wonky, and I've taken damage despite jumping over the shockwave. The weak point is also hard to reach because they're always focused on you, but you could probably throw out a bastard to distract them and go for it, but it's not an insta-kill like the other units. The ghosts are by far the most annoying. They're covered in a green goo that shields them from most damage, have a 2-hit whip attack at close range that requires precise timing to avoid, and 2 laser patterns they'll shoot out at a distance, or a volley of goo mortars. They're the only unit where I'd say that Bloody Summer is essential to a fight to remove their shields, but you still have to account for their close range attack that you can't stagger them out of, and if that weren't annoying enough, their weak point is also hard to reach. These are the most common enemy units, but there are some higher level ones that get thrown in occasionally. The Scythe Hands aren't menacing on their own, but they pose a problem when they're mixed in with other units. When they bring their hands up, they can block any attack in front of them that's not Bloody Summer. They can also shoot out 2 range shots that boomerang back to them, so you want to avoid being in front of them when that happens. Unlike the basic units, they have 2 weak points on either shoulder that can stagger them when they're turtling up. The crackheads are what happens if the rotters take up MMA. They'll throw out punches and kicks, and their weak point is an easy target, but that's all a ruse to lull you into a false sense of security. The real threat comes from the fact that after you kill them, they have a chance of rising back up and becoming stronger, with more powerful attacks that have shockwave properties and disjointed hitboxes. They can resurrect up to 2 times, but you'll never know if they'll revive, or if it's only once or twice. It's like they weaponized Mask the Smith. Mix them up with the Scythe Hands and the Fatties for a real bad time. There are 2 enemies that I guess count as mini-bosses, if only because their health bars actually take up space on the HUD. The Skeleton is annoying for a variety of reasons. It's got a 2-hit combo that comes out slow, but can't be staggered out of, a variety of range attack patterns, a stomp that causes a shockwave that also has wonky hitboxes, and it can spawn rotters to harass you while it does its bullshit with impunity. And despite having 3 weak points on the back, that's still not enough to outright kill it. You gotta wear it down and pay attention to its patterns. Now the White Devil?
Alright! This White Devil thing has gone far enough.
This thing is a menace. Teleports everywhere, has a 3-hit staggerless combo, a command grab that takes out a chunk of your health, spews out gas that has a lingering hurt floor, and spawns a turret that chips away at your health while it harasses you with its teleporting. What confuses me the most about this enemy is that it's the closest thing Romeo has to a Virgil. You're meant to lose to it in your first combat encounter, it haunts you during the lead up to a boss fight, but then after that, it just becomes a boss at the end of Chalice dungeons. More on those later. This leads to my major issues with Romeo's bosses. See, the story tells you that you're going to face off against Juliet and her cabal of time criminals. Each chapter takes you to an era of Deadford in which they've gone into hiding, and you learn about their backstory from either picking up notes in the field or talking to someone who knows about their case. Or you might just learn everything straight from the source.
The side has been burned into my very eyes. You talk too much.
But for all the build-up and theming of their respective levels, every boss fight ends up with you fighting a giant monster. Like, boss fights in No More Heroes are typically duels because the targets are just about the same size as Travis. This is important because you can potentially stagger any boss in the game and suplex them. Lollipop Chainsaw bosses have more gimmicks, but you can cap off each boss phase by mashing a QTE to bisect them with Juliet's chainsaw. Same goes for Killer is Dead. Wear a boss down until the icon appears that lets Mondo decapitate them with his sword. Every boss fight in Romeo amounts to you running around a boss's attacks, hitting them enough times to build a Bloody Summer, and daisy chaining your combos and Bloody Summers enough times until the boss's health runs out. Use your bastards to stun them or slow them down enough to stack on the damage, or DPS them with poison, but it's all in service to stacking up Bloody Summer charges. Yeah, shooting weak point staggers them, but that's just more opportunities for free hits until you have enough to BS. I don't mind the occasional big guy as a boss, but with how the intro tells you that Romeo fought a Doom Guy variant of Juliet, I was hoping the game would play up on the creep factor of seeing the face of the woman you love on every monster you fought. I hated them for what they were, but at least the set pieces where Paula chases you in Shadows of the Damned made sure you had to face Paula and not a monster you're told is Paula, but they do that too. Although Travis's Death Trap skills are limited in scope compared to Romeo's Bastards, there's a lot more going on under the hood in No More Heroes 3's combat because of the other mechanics at play. Cap off a combo with a death blow, and you get a roulette spin. If you're lucky, that can net you a bonus effect in a fight that puts you in Mustang mode, or lets you suplex the boss without having to stagger them. Or you can unlock Travis's full green mode to Henshin and unlock an extra set of moves against the boss for a brief moment. Or just throw out a dropkick and avoid some bullshit. This is what I mean when I say that Romeo's arsenal is well-rounded, but the actual combat mechanics are sparse compared to other Grasshopper titles. Does this mean the combat is bad? No, just not as interesting as it could be, knowing what Grasshopper is capable of. I used to think that Romeo is best when you're thrown in a crowd of rotters instead of a boss fight, but now that I've run through them over and over again, it does feel good to jump into a fight with maxed out stats, weapons, and a good bastard rotation. Instead of being obstacles you have to overcome in your first run, they become a demonstration of how well you understand the mechanics at play, and how to optimize your approach to each challenge. I set a personal goal to go through the boss rush challenge without ever using a heal besides Bloody Summer, and it's not that hard to pull off. I like the exploration in Romeo. As a member of the FBI's Space-Time Division, you spend your days aboard the ship the last night, where you chat with other crew members or Romeo's family. When you're given the next case, you have to use a scanner to detect the newest anomaly. This amounts to another minigame where you're doing Pong with 4 paddles. Once you've scanned the area and found the anomaly, you go through a sequence of destroying the entity protecting the anomaly and entering it with your grandfather's bike. Each area of Deadford is wide open and full of space to search for items and to fight enemies. My biggest sticking point about No More Heroes 3 was that, despite having 4 hubs to explore, you never actually fought in those hubs. Instead, you get transported to another screen to fight enemies, which made the gameplay feel like you were playing an action RPG. I'm glad that Romeo isn't bound to the Switch's hardware, because we can actually have levels with combat and exploration at the same time. Your long-term goal in each mission is to collect enough parts to create a key to open a Callista gate that leads to the chapter's boss fight. Eventually, you'll come upon dead ends or doors or barriers that require their own keys. This is where subspace comes in. You'll find TVs in the field that you can use to jump into subspace. This is an alternate dimension that's a lot more abstract than real space and focused entirely on exploration, with 0 combat encounters. except for the final area, that's nothing but combat in subspace. Grasshopper found a new way of trolling the player by simply asking, what if we took the voxels from the exclamation marks in No More Heroes and made hostile architecture out of them? You'll find yourself in a vast, empty landscape, but as soon as you move around, you'll see the walls close in and reveal the labyrinth you've fallen into. Some areas are blocked off because you have to interact with a node and turn it into a sphere by manipulating the D-pad. Don't fall for the trap of trying to use the left stick. You'll be stuck there wondering why the sphere isn't forming. I do like how the particles for the intangible elements resemble the blood particles when you shoot the mask in Killer 7 for puzzle hints. You'll collect keys to open barriers in subspace, and this opens up areas in real space. And every time you pick up part of a Clistigate key, you'll unlock another TV to warp back. It's really easy to get turned around in subspace, so a good way to know if you're on the right track is that the guy in the TV is telling you something new. Also, you'll sometimes see distorted versions of Juliet pointing the way, but this isn't always the most accurate method. And although subspace provides a nice respite from combat, be aware that fall damage is still a thing in the not Matrix. While you're out in the field, you'll find dimensional tears that lead to a place called the Palace Athena. I like a good pun like everyone else does, but we gotta keep it a buck. These are chalice dungeons. You'll go through a series of rooms, snap map together, and fight hordes of enemies along the way. They'll either lurk in the hallways, or lock you in an arena while waves spawn in. Some rooms will have environmental hazards that cause status effects that you have to avoid, or else you can't dodge or use other weapons besides your basic kit. At the end of each dungeon, you'll fight a mini-boss or a big wave of minor enemies, and past them are the exit room where you're rewarded with upgrade material. Palace Athena dungeons have different difficulties that up the challenge and the rewards, and you can run them as many times as you want, so they're great sources for farming upgrades. But their inclusion to the game, as well as how the bosses are all big monsters, made me realize that Romeo's gameplay, despite all it takes from past Grasshopper titles, isn't a typical slash 'em up at its core. It's a Souls-light, or rather a Let It Die light. The healing, the iframe dodging, Bloody Summer serving as a sort of rally system, accessing checkpoints resets the local enemy spawns and healing charges, the status effects that interrupt your combos until they run out or you use remedies to cure them, warping back to the hub to access the shop or craft support items, the really shitty input buffering. I don't think it's out there to compare Romeo to the Jedi games, and how they borrow elements of Souls design, but keep the focus entirely on the action and less on the stat management. Funny enough, the juxtaposition of subspace against real space in a Starship hub area reminded me of Saints Row 4. Both games even got similar quantum tunneling loading screens. But where Saints Row was ripping on Mass Effect and the Normandy with its hub, I think Romeo makes a smarter call by making the hub a top-down 2D screen. It cuts down on all the time wasted having to go from room to room to do housekeeping, and most likely saves Grasshopper from having to grind out more 3D assets, for what is essentially a liminal space between story segments. When I found out that you could control the ship to move between points of interest in space, I thought it was going to play out like the Gummi Ship minigame in Kingdom Hearts. But it's more like Super Mario Galaxy, in that you're moving a cursor on screen to catch space debris while moving your ship towards its destination. You can take that debris and convert it into upgrade materials, but it takes a lot of debris to form a single ore, so you're better off running sessions in Palace Athena if you want a more consistent method of farming resources. Continuing the Souls-light analogy, killing enemies nets you energy that you can use as currency in the shop or to level up Romeo's base stats. You gotta play another minigame where you steer a little ship towards an upgrade node that increases your health, your healing charges, the amount of health recovered from those charges, and how many Bloody Summer charges you can carry, with a max of 3. Don't worry about whether you've taken the optimal route in the minigame. You can always undo your progress if you think you found a better way, and you can always double back to catch any nodes you missed the first time. Alright, that's all the gameplay stuff that's worth covering. There's other things I haven't touched on, like taking on challenges to fight bosses you've already beaten for bonus rewards, or the 100 question dating game, or the super secret final upgrade that requires a buttload of energy to unlock and completely breaks the game's balance, but it's cool because if you've sunk that much cost in the game, then you deserve the victory lap. But, that's all minutia. Regarding Romeo's plot, I can't say for sure whether it's as good as Grasshopper's best stuff, as I haven't played their VNs yet, but if you compare it to their Sonic Seen Better Days era, I'd say it knocks them out of the park. Admittedly, it's a low bar to clear, but still good to see that Unk still got it. The plot features all of Grasshopper staples: episodic structure, ominous thematic quotes, dreams and nightmares influencing, maybe even affecting reality, repetition of sequences to denote a breakdown of said reality, anime sequence that feels out of place with the rest of the story but that might be the point of its inclusion, and the abrupt genre shift into horror for a single sequence. Each episode features one of the time crooks and themes the area around them, and I'm glad to report that Romeo doesn't step on the Killer Is Dead rake marked not really coming together until the post-game codex basically spells out everything. The story doesn't feel like it ran out of gas the way Shadows of the Damned does, nor does it feel like fluff the way Lollipop Chainsaw does. It feels like we're getting somewhere with every case we tackle, every time crook we bring to justice. Something I love about Grasshopper's ability to mix various types of media to tell its story is that they don't put one type of media above another when it comes to dropping critical plot elements. A dialogue box will have just as much weight to the story as something spoken in a cutscene. It's cool, but I can't help but wonder if the chatter between Romeo and his grandfather being text boxes was partially motivated on saving money in the recording booth, resulting in a game that feels like it should have focus and dialogue to be mostly silent, save for the occasional Zelda bark to indicate that characters are talking. That might be a blessing in disguise, considering how Romeo released just a few months after that joke got run into the ground on Twitter.
Hey!
Plot aside, what really captivated me about Romeo was his visuals. Not in a GTA 6 this will be graphics in 2013 kind of way, but in a oh so that's how Wanted Dead would look like if it had better lighting kind of way. I don't want to keep using that game as a punching bag, but I can't not make the comparison when I see the diner sequences in Romeo look this good and remember the flat or blown out lighting in Wanted Dead. I know Unreal Engine is a meme at this point, but Romeo really shows that the 7th gen Japanese 3D game aesthetic from the mid-2000s can still work in current year. There's a moment where I arrived in what I initially thought was Curtis's villa from Killer 7. Seriously, my noticing senses were going haywire here. But the interior has these framed photos on the walls, and these are the only surfaces in the game with a unique reflective property that mirrors what the frames would be facing. Put bluntly, they're cube maps, but really good use of cube maps because they're only ever used on these frames. Same goes for the grungy mirrors in the horror level. They reflect back the room, but true to 7th gen fashion, they don't reflect Romeo at all. Each area is decent theming, and I chuckled when I saw that the first field mission was set in a mall in the 80s, because it made me think of both Dead Rising for obvious reasons, but also of the original Dawn of the Dead, whenever I had to fight rotters with guns. City Hall is a nice contrast with its wide open starting areas that eventually get more and more constrained as you go from outside, to the main hall, to specific wings, and then individual rooms. I wonder if the vault in the mayor's office is meant to call back to the vault puzzle in Killer 7. This airs Juliet being the mayor and displayed as a marionette on strings is one of those great visual gags that Grasshopper pulls off on occasion, like when you reach the inner sanctum of First Life in Killer 7. It's a shame then that you end up fighting what looks like the future devil from Chainsaw Man. The horror level ain't bad. It's a more fleshed out version of what No More Heroes 3 was doing with Midori Midorikawa, and funny enough, she's one of Romeo's crewmates in this game. The cult level is where I felt the game resembled Lollipop Chainsaw, but I might have my wires crossed with how the farm level was in that game, and how that boss reminds me of the surprise buddy you get in Romeo. The underground catacombs being a complex set of tunnels and opening up into a huge chasm contrasts with the relative simplicity of the islands earlier in the level. It's also where the game's environments feel the most soulsy outside of the Chalice dungeons. The Return to City Hall is a fun remix, but you've already seen most of the level, barring the very top of the building's tower. Cool approach to the building with the club lighting on the facade though. The subspace level isn't my favorite, but it's what you would expect an endgame section should look like. If you've played Shadows of the Damned, you'll find it resembles that section where you gotta rotate blocks to progress. Being a Grasshopper title, it shouldn't surprise you that Romeo was able to juggle a variety of art styles and never feels like a slapdash mess of visual design. The in-game menu is the slickest thing Grasshopper's cooked, and the tutorial slides bring back Master Gita from TSA and No More Heroes 3. Going back to Saints Row 4, the sprite work in Romeo's hub reminded me of Johnny Gat's rescue mission, but with actual sprites and not a pixel filter on 3D models. Each episode has its own set of comic page cutscenes with a different art style that range from horror to cape shit to indie to pop art. The green on black VN screens make a comeback from TSA and No More Heroes 3, and I wonder if there's a deliberate connection there, or if it's just another element of Grasshopper's house style in their ever-growing repertoire. I've touched on the gameplay, the plot, the visuals, not the music, but the music's really good. But what really kept me engaged with Romeo is the recurring motifs I'd seen from past Grasshopper titles. The most obvious being death and rebirth, as that's Romeo's whole deal, but death is expressed in Grasshopper games not as the end of a story, but the transition between states. You can see this in Killer 7 when Master Smith dies and becomes something stronger, much like what happens to Romeo after becoming Deadman. The way that Romeo and his grandfather essentially become a single entity is kinda like how Johnson and Garcia bonded and became 8 Hearts in the unofficial Shadows of the Dam sequel, Serious Moonlight. It's one of the TSA levels, if you didn't know. In No More Heroes 3, Travis actually dies at the hands of Henry, and he ends up in the side-scrolling beat-em-up featured at the start of the game, and meets the hero of that game, Deathman. In their talks, they share a glass of wine before Deathman sends Travis back to the world of the living, in the same manner as how he returned to Earth in TSA. Romeo experiences a similar moment, where the game becomes a sprite adventure purgatory that he has to escape to return to the world of the living. As for the wine, it seems to be Juliet's favorite drink, but she only seems to drink it when she's about to make a pact with one of the Time Crooks. She empowers them in the same way that Amelie empowered Higgs in Death Stranding. As I was going through TSA in preparation for this video, I had to take note of the name of the death chip you acquire when you beat Dr. Juvenile, the creator of the Death Drive, and the one responsible for all the bosses you fought. The Dendrobium chip sucks energy from nearby enemies and converts it to attack energy. Isn't that what the bosses are doing with Juliet Dendrobium's energy? Oh yeah, and all the beheadings. No idea if there's anything more to that than shock imagery, but I've seen so much fictional ISIS footage working on this video.
Romeos are no more. I have slain them each and all. I must join them anon.
I could go on forever, but I think you can tell that I love Romeo Is A Deadman. This is what I wanted from Ninja Gaiden 4. Not just enjoyable combat, but a plot that keeps me engaged, a variety of locales to explore, and some imagery and music that stays with me. And while I don't mind Ryu's more greebled look, Romeo's design looks clean, especially with how his helmet changes over time to look less Metal Hero and more akin to Super Sentai or Ultraman. I do wish we could swap out his outfits for the deputy uniform in the intro, or more helmet options, but I'm really into how the colors come together for his design. Whatever shortcomings I find in the game's combat or story don't hold a candle to the overall joy I had in playing a new 3D Grasshopper game. They got to make a new game on their terms that celebrates their history without feeling burdened with all the lore and cameos the way TSA wound up in certain story beats.
Hey, didn't you guys meet in TSA? Well, it's my first appearance in the numbered series, and I'm the main character of a different game, so I'm fine with the first encounter thing.
Oh, and the game goes for $50 in 2026. Play Romeo Is A Deadman.
On some day, in some era, on some Monday, at some time, during some season, I'll be waiting for you.
I'll go see you.
What do you think he whispered to her?
I bet it was just right.
Like a bisexual.